What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, it's my team selection for Game Week 29. There is a lot to get through in this one. I'm going to give you a brief overview of my team, talk through why I cannot free hit in 29, then go through potentially taking my first hits of the season. And if I don't do that, maybe I should wildcard. So I've got some wildcard drafts to show you as well. Plus, I'll quickly show you how I did in Game Week 28. So let's get into it. So Game Week 28 was unfortunately another red arrow for me. And it feels like every time I take a step forward, there's always 2 or 3 steps back this season. If I look at Game Week 24, for example, I was 208k. In Game Week 25, I'm 123k. My highest rank of the season so far. Really nice green arrow. Since then, 3 red arrows on the bounce. 129k, 177k, and now I'm back at 208k, exactly where I was in Game Week 24. And actually, when I look back even further, since that massive green arrow in Game Week 15, where I went from 860k to 268k, I've just gone up and down. I just can't get a run going where I just continue to get green arrows all the way and break into that top 100k. It just hasn't happened. I'm not losing hope because there's still chips to be played, blanks, doubles, plenty of points on offer for the final stretch of the season. It's just been frustrating so far. Hopefully I can turn it around soon. In terms of where the points came from, 30 of the 54 I scored were from Salah, and his points don't really matter because so many people own him. Commiserations if you went for Palmer captaincy. It's a really harsh way to lose out. Salah gets 2 penalty scores and Palmer gets 1 misses. It can happen in FPL. Very frustrating. I'm just glad that I was on the right end of it. The only other player that returned was Ollie Watkins, 9-pointer. Everybody else blanked. It was a really pathetic week for my team, in all honesty. If I can try and find a positive, I didn't make a transfer. Because the only thing I could have done was Cunha to Visser. I couldn't afford Cunha to Wood, and Wood blanked anyway, and Visser blanked. And if I'd gone for him, I would have benched Utara, who got a 1-pointer. So I'm 1 point down by not going for Visser, but I'm a transfer up, and I think that's much more valuable. So that's the only positive. I didn't make a move. Otherwise, just no points from Pickford, Gabriel, Mykolenko, Trent, Palmer, Mbeumo, Nwaneri got a 1-pointer off before the 60th minute, and Isak. Just rubbish, and there's nothing more I can say about that. But we've got to move on. Maybe I can take 2 or 3 steps forward in Game Week 29. Let's take a look. So usually I go through my team bit by bit. Defenders first, then midfielders, then forwards. But for this week in particular, it's probably more important to talk about my potential options because there's so many different ways I can play Game Week 29. So I'm going to give you a quick overview of how the team is looking, talk about why there's no way I can free hit in Game Week 29, and then I'll go through the potential options for this team. I would say as it stands, as someone potentially looking to play through Game Week 29, I've got 5 to 6 perfectly reasonable options this week. So Pickford and Mykolenko double up on Everton defence against West Ham at home. They're not that exciting for free hitters. They're not great from 30 onwards, but for 29, they're more than fine. Gabriel against Chelsea at home is good. Anderson against Spurs at home is probably okay as well. Fulham are strong. Spurs are playing in Europe tonight. That game could go to extra time as well. Anderson's probably okay to have to play. Same with Cole Palmer. And then in Burma against Bournemouth away, it's also fine. Rest of the players, Greaves, I'd expect a 1-pointer as always from an Ipswich defender. Utara is probably not going to start unless there's an injury that's announced by Iriola in the press conference tomorrow. And then Nwaneri is a bit of a headache. He was rested completely in the Champions League last night, so that does point towards a start against Chelsea. And if I was predicting the Arsenal lineup, it would probably have him in it, but I wouldn't have that much confidence. Trossard and Martinelli were also rested last night. They did come on, but they didn't start the game. They're presumably going to be in the team. And then Marino started, but he only played 64 minutes. He's more than capable of starting again against Chelsea. So although I think Nwaneri could start, there's also every chance he's on the bench. And then everyone else blanks. Salah, Watkins, Trent, Isak, no fixture, and Cunha is suspended. So I've got 9 playing players. I would say 5 to 6 of them are okay. There's no way I can free hit though, because this is what my team would look like in Game Week 30. Pickford and Mykolenko against Liverpool away. I could probably get away with Pickford. I wouldn't want to play Mykolenko. The options on the bench are Anderson against Arsenal away, Greaves against Bournemouth away. Trent is injured. We don't know how long for, but I'm going to assume he's not back for Game Week 30. So if I free hit in 29, I would have 2 free transfers in 30. I'd probably have to spend them on defenders. And then you look at the rest of the team. Palmer, Mbeumo, Salah, Isak, Watkins, all fine. Watkins did go off with an injury last night, but I think it's just a small one. I suspect he'll be back for Game Week 30. But then I'm still stuck with Nwaneri. He'll still be a minute's risk, no matter which way you frame it. And Utara might not start against Ipswich. So I've got 2 transfers, probably going to have to use them on defenders, and I've still got Nwaneri and Utara. And also, if you free hit this week, and you've still got Wildcard left, you should probably be looking to use that around game weeks 34 or 35, so you dead end your team into 33, 34. I can't do that. I've got to use 2 transfers on defenders, still got Nwaneri and Utara, and I've only got 1 Newcastle player and no Palace, who double in game week 32. Free hit for my team just does not work whatsoever. You should either be free hitting this week and then wildcarding in 34, 35, depending on how the fixtures fall, or you should be wildcarding in 29, 30, 31, and then free hitting in 33, 34. If you don't have one of those chips, it's a bit different, but I'm only talking about my team in this video. So as you can see, in my opinion at least, free hit doesn't work. So let's talk about the other options. So the first 2 options both include selling Trent Alexander-Arnold and using the funds to buy Erling Haaland without having to sell Salah, which sounds good, but they both cost a -8, which is not ideal. Option 1 is Trent, Isak, Cunha and Watkins out, all 3 of my forwards, and then I would buy Vardiol, Beto, Evan-Nielsen and Erling Haaland. Selling Isak is not great for most people, but for me it only cost 0.2 million to buy him back. And if I don't use a chip this week, I would definitely wildcard in 30 or 31, and I could just bring him back in then. If I wildcarded in 31 and missed Isak for Brentford at home, again, not ideal, but probably not the end of the world. This is what the team would look like. I'm not going to go through every single player again. I would say pretty decent on paper. My only concern is I don't have Kluivert. I think he's great this week. And also, I'm taking a -8, and I've still got Nwaneri and Utara. Now, I can just about get behind the fact that Nwaneri might start. Utara, I just don't see it. So I'm spending 8 points to delay a wildcard just for the fixture info for the FA Cup, which is important, don't get me wrong. And I've still got 2 players that might not even start and could just be 1-point cameos. So I'm not quite sure about it. Option 2 is basically, instead of Vardiol, it's Milenkovic, and instead of Beto, it's Chris Wood. I think either way, whichever of those 2 options I go for, this team doesn't really survive game week 30, and I still probably need to wildcard that week instead of 29, because Mykolenko, Anderson and Greaves have got bad fixtures, so I've got to make a defender transfer, and I'm still stuck with Nwaneri and Utara. So I would have to wildcard in game week 30. Now, at that point, I would have the FA Cup information, but I wouldn't necessarily have the rescheduled fixtures. So is it worth delaying, or do I just wildcard now and hope that I can get away with it? But that's the first 2 options. Out of those 2, I think I prefer the one with Chris Wood and Milenkovic, because Vardiol is a good transfer in, but mostly if you're going to play through 30 as well, so you get the Leicester fixture. For 1 week only, I'd probably rather just have Chris Wood against Ipswich and fund that by having Milenkovic. So the second 2 options are both -4 instead of -8, which is good, but they either include not buying Salah or they include not buying Haaland, which actually might not be the end of the world for my team, but I'll talk about that in a minute. Option 3 then, Salah, Watkins and Cunha out, letting me keep Alexander Isak. I know I've just said it would only cost me 0.2 to buy him back, but as I know I will 100% want him for 31 and 32 if he's fit and available. If I can save the money, I should. And then Kluivert, Wood and Haaland in. Kluivert's someone I'd really like this week. Selling Salah, I know you all hate it, right? You really don't need to tell me. I'm fully aware of the sentiment this week around selling Salah. But for me, it's just a question of team value more than anything else. He can't punish me in 29. He's got no fixture. And in game week 30, I'm happy to captain Haaland over Salah. And I don't think my team is going to survive until 31 anyway. So if I don't wildcard this week, I'm probably wildcarding in 30 anyway. And I can just get Salah back if it works for my strategy. It's just whether I can afford the 0.6 million team value loss. Having looked at various different routes and strategies for the rest of the season, I believe that money is probably not going to be as big an issue as maybe it has been, but that could also be wrong. So I wouldn't sell Salah lightly, but it is something I'm considering. This is what the team would look like. It still doesn't survive game week 30 because I've still got Mykolenko, Anderson, Trent who's injured and Greaves, Nwaneri and Utara. So wildcard 30 would probably be the play. Because it's only a -4, I could just take a -8 like the other options and sell Utara for Kluivert as well. For Semenyo. That could work. But selling Salah as part of a -8 when I could just take a different -8 and get Haaland, I'm not convinced by that. And I think as good as Kluivert is, maybe I just let him go. Option 4 is Watkins, Isak and Cunha out. So all 3 of my forwards again, but I keep Salah and Trent. And I just buy Beto, Wood and Evan-Nielsen. If I was trying to survive until game week 31, I would probably go for Strand Larsen over Beto. but I don't think that's going to happen. And it would just allow me to to captain Chris Wood. And the reason I'm saying that not getting Haaland might not be the end of the world, a big reason for Haaland this week is captaincy, but also it's the Leicester fixture in 31, same with Vardiol. So if I know that if I don't wildcard this week, I'm going to wildcard in 30, is Haaland that important? I don't know, maybe not. And it lets me keep the team value in Salah, and I think Chris Wood is a perfectly reasonable captain, especially if I don't have someone like Fernandes or Kluivert to choose from instead. I look at that team, and I know in the past I would think it's a -4, it's fine. You just let the other players do what they need to do. Or if this was me 5 seasons ago, I'd probably take like a -12 or a -16, just completely fix it. I think in the situation we're in, I don't think I can justify that many points when I've literally got a wild card. So they're the options. That's the 4 options if I just play through. There's probably other combinations I haven't thought about yet. The other option is wildcard. So let's talk about that as well. By the way, I checked out my suggested transfers over on Fantasy Football Hub. You can do the same for your team using the link in the description below. There's 7-day free trial, 30% off at the moment. And as well as recommending Watkins to Haaland, who is great to get in, I think, it also recommends Salah to Semenyo. So it's not just me that thinks potentially selling Salah could work and buying Bournemouth midfielders is decent. My suggested transfers also have the same. I don't know if I can be as confident about selling Salah, but it's definitely something that I will consider. And like I said, if you want to check out your suggested transfers, link in the description below. So these are some thoughts on which weeks I could wildcard for my team. Game week 29 would allow me to avoid any points hits. So straight away, if I activate the chip this week, I'm not spending 8 or 4 points, but I'm also setting up a good game week 29 team, removing minutes risk, but also removing players with bad fixtures. I could also, if I wanted to, have 4 Palace and Newcastle players on the bench. So that would allow me to start setting up for double game week 32. And also you can work it so you can bench boost in 32 as well, even though it would be single game week players. Not a huge issue in my opinion. The concerns I have are locking in the wrong double game week players. So let's say I go for a bench of Isak, Livramento and Dan Burn. That's 3 Newcastle. All of a sudden Anthony Gordon might look like a great option from 31. And I'm not going to remove a Newcastle player that I've already got to get him in. And that happened to me last year. I played through game week 34 with 10 or 11 doublers, and 3 hitters just had different players, and they absolutely smashed me. And you just don't have enough transfers to kind of change it all around. Also, if, say, Crystal Palace win in the FA Cup, and so do Bournemouth, and then Villa and Man City also double, wildcard 31 and bench boost 33 is going to look really good. And I'll be stuck on bench boosting in 32 because I won't be able to pivot. There won't be enough transfers. So that's all concerns. There's also an international break before game week 30 and FA Cup matches. And the players playing in those FA Cup matches are very important for the rest of the season. There's a big chance of injuries and stuff like that. But you set up a really good 29 team. If you stay injury free, you've got a good game weeks 30, 31, 32, etc. team as well. So there are definitely benefits to do it. And because I would have my free hit left, that lets me manage 33 or 34. I can basically wait until the FA Cup matches are played, then decide which week I'm free hitting. Game week 30 is a good middle ground. You do have the FA Cup info, so you know who's won in the quarterfinals, but you don't necessarily have the confirmed double game week info. But I'm so confident in the skills of Tala, Ben, James from Planet FPL predicting fixtures that once they've got those FA Cup results and they know what's happening in Europe this week, they'll have a good idea of where the fixtures are going to go. So game week 30 wildcarders will be able to set a team much easier than game week 29. They just might not have the confirmed double game week weeks. We'll have to rely on the predictors who are very good. You also don't have to worry about blank game week 29 planning. So basically you just sort your team for 29 knowing you're going to free hit the next week. So basically you're dead ending. And you can load up on 3 Newcastle and Palace players. So although I would have to use all my transfers this week, I could set my team up in a way where it could just roll for a few weeks. So basically, if I wildcard this week, I'm banking 2 transfers straight away for Newcastle Palace players. If I wildcard 30, I've used my transfers in 29, but I can set my team up with the information we have at hand. The question is the info from the FA Cup matches worth an 8 or 4 point hit and a worse game week 2019? That's the kind of things I'm thinking about this week. And then wildcard 31 is the ideal scenario. You'll almost certainly have the double game week schedule for 33 and blank game week 34 by then. but probably not an option for me. My team has been decimated recently, suspensions and injuries. Too many hits needed this week. This team still doesn't look great for Game Week 30, even if I take those hits. And I've got to use all my transfers this week and next week. So I'm not ruling out Game Week 31 wildcard. I just don't think it works for my team. I'd love to be able to play through. I've seen really good teams that are going to make transfers this week look great for Game Week 30 and could just wait. I wish I was in that position, but I'm not. So I'm definitely wildcarding in 29 or 30, or at least almost certainly, like 95% sure. Let's look at Wildcard 29 drafts. So the first draft has Salah on the bench instead of Isak. The idea would be to buy Isak back in Game Weeks 30 or 31. I would fund that move by selling Palmer, Salah or Haaland. Which player I sell would depend on which week I'm free hitting in 33 or 34. That decision has to wait until the FA Cup quarter-final games have been played. So I've got a route back to Isak. I'm just not sure which route I'm taking right now. Options are open. In goal, Jose Sarr against Southampton away. Nice and cheap, good fixture. On the bench, Henderson ready for Palace's double in 32. Palace also play Southampton in Game Week 30. Back three, Gabriel. He is basically in every single draft that I do at the moment. Arsenal players and Palace players are really important for this strategy. You want at least 2 Arsenal players, I would say. And by Game Week 32, you want at least 3 Palace because obviously they've got the double. But basically, Palace play Arsenal in Game Week 34. So if Palace beat Fulham in the FA Cup, Palace and Arsenal will blank in 34 and probably double in 33. In that case, you delay the free hit till 34 and you've got 5 to 6 doublers ready to go. Likewise, if Palace lose to Fulham, you probably free hit in 33 instead, knowing you're coming back to 5 to 6 Arsenal Palace players in Game Week 34, even if Palace don't have an ideal fixture that week. So Arsenal players are really key to this strategy. Mykolenko is not ideal, but honestly, if you're trying to put Salah in, you've got to make sacrifices, and there's not a huge amount of 4.5 million defenders that are great on this strategy. Mykolenko at least has a good fixture this week. Forest away in 32 is not great, but it's not awful. And 35 onwards, Everton's fixtures are pretty good. And then Milenkovic against Ipswich away, a Forest defender's pretty decent for this strategy. If I knew 100% that Forest weren't going to blank in 34, I would probably double up on them, but they might do. That's why I don't really want to do it. Midfield is Palmer against Arsenal away. Good fixtures after this week. Trossard against Chelsea at home. That's my second Arsenal player. I'm not all that keen on going Trossard or Martinelli. I just think longer term, if Arsenal get top 4 wrapped up and they're still in the Champions League, they could just tank the league and just rotate. So that is a concern. I might go for double Arsenal defence instead. Kluivert and Semenyo from Bournemouth. Ipswich are home in 31. Chance of doubling in 33 if they beat Man City in the FA Cup. And then Beto, Haaland and Evan Nielsen front 3. Again, Beto has to be in to fund that move for Salah, and he would basically get sold later on. Even if, I don't know, yeah, so basically, right, if Salah gets sold, then Beto goes to Isak. If Haaland gets sold, he goes to Isak, and then I've got money to do Beto to Mateta. So that's the idea. I've got 2 transfers. By Game Week 32, I'll have 6 Newcastle Palace players, and then hopefully I can just free hit 33 and 34 and manage the rest of the season. As I've already mentioned, you can kind of get screwed over if Game Week 33 double looks amazing for bench boost, but that's about it. I think every other situation is manageable, but you have to get a bit lucky, right? No injuries over the international break, none in the FA Cup matches, and hope that these players keep starting. Trossard is definitely a worry for me. So for draft number 2, I don't have Salah on the bench. I've got Isak instead, ready for the good fixtures after 29 plus the double in 32. I've also got Henderson, Livramento and Burns. So 3 Newcastle, 1 Palace ready for 32. Ideally, you probably go 2 Palace, 2 Newcastle and leave your options open for the third player from both teams. But having looked at different transfer routes over 30, 31, 32, etc., it's very handy to just buy Crystal Palace midfielders, wait and see what happens in the quarterfinals of the FA Cup, then decide which of your midfielders to sell and buy Eze and Sarr. That would mean that I'm locking myself out of Mateta with this draft and Anthony Gordon. But again, if you're making this kind of play, something has to give. The other player to mention is Munoz. He doesn't feature that heavily on many of my drafts. The biggest concern for me is really the Southampton game in Game Week 30. He doesn't play in 29. Brighton at home in 31 is pretty good, but it's not the end of the world if you don't own him. And actually, the 2 fixtures in the double in 32 for Palace are pretty bad for defenders. It's Newcastle away and City away. I know what he's capable of going forward, and it's possible that he scores and keeps a clean sheet in one of those games in the double. but maybe I go against him. He's more expensive than Burn and Livramento, who have better fixtures in the double. And again, it's very difficult to explain every single little part of this strategy in this video. It gets very complicated. But basically, buying Eze and Sarr makes it a bit more manageable than having Munoz on the bench. That's why he doesn't feature that much. Elsewhere, still got Mykolenko, which I'm not completely happy with, but it does allow me to have Fernandes in midfield and Gabriel and Raya in defence, so double up on Arsenal. I'm not ruling out going back to triple Arsenal defence, which I've done before. It is really handy to have 2 or 3 Arsenal players on this strategy, and I'm not entirely happy with Trossard, but he's in this draft, and then it's Nico Williams instead of Milenkovic just for money reasons. Most of the time, players like Kluivert, Evan Nielsen, Haaland, Palmer, they make pretty much every draft. So draft number 3 goes back to not having Isak in the squad, but it also doesn't have Salah in the squad either, and somehow it might be my favourite draft of the 3. Now, selling Salah on Wildcard is not fun. I really wish I didn't have to think about it, and I know it could go horribly wrong, and if it does, what comments are coming my way? But I think it's worth thinking about. So let me explain how this would work. Henderson, Livramento and Dan Burn on the bench once again. Eze ready for Southampton away in 30, plus the double in 32. The key to Salah or not really comes down to which week you're free hitting. And obviously we don't know that without the FA Cup quarter-final information. If I end up free hitting in game week 33, I don't need to keep Haaland. So in game week 31, after Haaland's played Leicester at home, I would do Haaland to Isak, which would give me my 3rd Newcastle player, and I could do Fernandes to Salah. And that would get Salah back for 32. I'd free hit in 33. I'd have Salah back for 34 against Spurs at home. And I'd probably keep Salah on free hit because it's Leicester away. If the results in the FA Cup go away where I want a free hit in 34 instead, that means I've got to keep Haaland. Therefore, I don't have the funds for Salah. But in some ways, he's a little bit less important, even though he could absolutely smash me, right? I completely get that. And in that situation, I would sell Fernandes to Sarr, giving me my 3rd Palace player, and then Chris Wood to Isak, giving me my 3rd Newcastle. So basically with this draft, if I free hit 33, Salah comes in 32 with Isak, and I just buy Sarr for a different midfielder later on. And if I free hit 34, I just stick without Salah, hope that my rank doesn't get decimated, which it absolutely could, and then just go from there. The advantages to this are, I don't have like a Trossard in midfield. I've got Fernandes instead. I've got Eze ready for the double in 32, and it's allowing me to have Vardiol instead of Mykolenko in defence, and then I've got Milenkovic instead of Nico Williams. This could go really well. In 29, it looks really good. It looks really good for 31. You make the decision for Isak later on, and then you just go from there. Easy like that. You just don't have the greatest FPL player of all time. I don't know what I'm going to do. My gut instinct is that I should wildcard this week and just hope that I can play the rest of the season without that FA Cup info. I really do think that's what I should do. I can make a really good team for 29. I can set it up in a way where I shouldn't get too screwed over by future fixtures. But I don't know, maybe I just take the hits and give myself less of a headache and figure it out in Game Week 30. The thing with Game Week 30 is we might still be going in blind in terms of where the double game weeks are going to fall, but at least we'll have that FA Cup info. I know what people are going to want me to do, any kind of hit this week that involves no chip and not selling Salah, but I once heard Late Riser from the FPL Wire say on a video, nobody ever thinks about your team as much as you do. And the problem at this stage of the season is everybody is very locked into what they're doing and they haven't thought about other strategies. I can tell you now, I've spent so much time thinking about Wildcard 29. I could talk about it quite in depth, I think. But I've also thought about free hit, not free hit. No one else has thought about my team as much as I have. And so as much as I know people will want me to keep Salah because they just can't see a scenario where it makes sense to sell him, and they can't see why you'd wildcard this week when they haven't thought about it, I think it could work, and I think it could work without Salah. And I know there's a world of pain that could potentially come my way as well. But I'm 200k. Maybe something has to give. Should that be Salah? Probably not. But I'm thinking about it. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there. If you enjoyed it, make sure to give it a like, hit that subscribe button, rate 5 stars if you listen on podcast. Check out Fantasy Football Hub using the link in the description below. I'll catch you tomorrow for final thoughts. Thanks for getting through this entire video if you did.